The first sight of her was not on a battlefield, but on every screen in the galaxy. Her image was broadcast in warning tall, terrifying, her eyes glowing like burning stars. They called her the destroyer of worlds. They said no army could face her and live. Every species learned her name with the same fear they reserved for extinction. She had crushed fleets, silenced rebellions, and erased entire planets without hesitation. The galaxy had one unspoken rule: never cross her path. But on a day no one expected, her warships emerged from hyperspace without warning. They came not to threaten, but to destroy. Cities burned before any could raise their shields. People ran into the streets only to see the sky swallowed by fire. No alliance dared fight back, because fighting her meant death. On the outer edge of the war zone, a single human ship drifted between debris fields. It was a rescue vessel, small and unarmed, meant to pick up survivors. Inside, Captain Daniel Rains watched the chaos from his viewport. His orders were simple: evacuate civilians and avoid contact at all costs. But the moment he saw the flagship in the distance, something in him refused to obey. The ship was unlike anything he had seen, black as a dead star, glowing with red lines like veins of molten metal. And somewhere inside, she was waiting. His crew pleaded for retreat, their voices cracking with panic. They reminded him of her reputation, of what she had done to the last fleet that challenged her. But Daniel only tightened his grip on the controls. He had seen the destruction she caused, but he had also noticed something no one else did: a hesitation in her strikes, a pause between devastation. It was like she was searching for something, not simply killing. Against every regulation, he steered the rescue vessel toward the flagship. The closer they came, the more their systems flickered under the ship's massive energy field. His crew cursed his name, but Daniel's eyes were fixed forward. He told them to prepare for boarding. No one could understand why a human captain would walk into the jaws of death willingly. When they reached docking range, no weapons fired, no alarms blared. Instead, the flagship's hangar opened as if inviting them in. The silence inside was worse than any battle. The air was heavy, the walls alive with strange symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. Soldiers stood at attention, their armor black and sharp-edged, their alien faces unreadable. None stopped him. They only watched Dot at the far end of the hangar. She stood. She was taller than any human, her figure draped in armor that looked grown from living metal. Chains hung loosely around her wrists, not as if restraining her, but as a reminder that she was bound only by choice. Her hair flowed like liquid night, and her eyes burned brighter up close, cutting through the dim light until they locked on him. Daniel expected rage. Instead, there was curiosity. She stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, as if measuring the human before her. Her voice, when it came, was deep and smooth, carrying an echo that seemed to vibrate through the air. She asked why he came. No one had ever approached her without an army or a plea for mercy. He answered simply, because he wanted to know why. Why the sudden attack? Why the hesitation before each strike? He spoke without trembling, without the fear that every being in the galaxy carried when they spoke her name. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted, like the faintest crack in a wall of stone. She asked if he feared death. He told her he had seen enough of it to stop fearing it. That caught her attention in a way nothing else had. She circled him, studying him as though trying to find the trick that kept his voice steady. She told him the universe was right to fear her, that she was capable of ending any life she wished. But when she said it, there was no pride, only the weariness of someone who had been forced to be a weapon for too long. Before he could ask more, a deep vibration shook the hangar. Her soldiers stiffened, receiving silent orders through their comms. She looked past him toward the docking bay where his ship waited. Another fleet had arrived, one not bound by fear, but by revenge. They meant to kill her, even if it cost every life aboard their ship's dot. She turned her gaze back to Daniel, the faintest trace of something dangerous flickering in her eyes. "Leave now," she ordered. But Daniel didn't move. He said if she wanted him gone, she would have to make him leave herself. For the first time, she smiled, not in amusement, but in surprise. Outside, the battle began. Inside the hangar, a human captain and the most feared being in the galaxy stood only a few steps apart, both knowing their next choice could decide the fate of more than just themselves. Asterisk. The hangar shook again, harder this time, as explosions echoed through the massive walls. Red warning lights swept across the chamber, casting shifting shadows on her face. The alien soldiers moved quickly, sealing bulkheads and readying their weapons. None of them looked at Daniel, as if his presence was now irrelevant compared to the threat outside. She turned away from him, striding toward the command lift. The chains around her wrists clinked with each step, their sounds strangely deliberate, like a reminder that she was choosing not to unleash herself. Daniel followed, without being told, his boots echoing across the metal floor. No guards stopped him, though several eyed him with silent suspicion. The lift rose fast, its walls alive with shifting symbols that seemed to respond to her presence. She stood still, hands at her sides, eyes fixed on the glowing patterns. Daniel could hear the distant hum of energy weapons firing, the deep thud of impacts against the ship's hull. He wondered why she allowed him to stay near her. When the lift doors opened, the command bridge came into view, an enormous space lined with alien officers, their stations arranged in a circle around a central platform. The galaxy spun in a vast holographic display above them, the battle raging on its surface in bursts of red and blue light. Her voice cut through the chaos, issuing rapid orders in a language Daniel didn't know. Yet her tone left no doubt. This was control. Enemy fleet was larger than Daniel had expected. Dozens of ships, their formation tight, moving like a single predator. They were using tactics meant to overwhelm even her flagship. Shields flared with each hit, but her ship didn't falter. Daniel watched as she studied the holographic battlefield. Her expression sharp, unreadable. Then her gaze shifted to him. Without breaking stride, she pointed to a console near the edge of the platform and told him to stand there. He didn't know the controls, but her second command officer slid aside, letting him take the seat. It was a strange gesture, putting the human in the middle of her war room. She began speaking to him in Galactic Standard, the common tongue of traitors and diplomats. She told him the attacking fleet was from the Kyrr Dominion, a power that had feared her for years but never dared to strike until now. Daniel asked why they had attacked this time. She hesitated for only a second before answering. They believed she was weak. The enemy broke through one defensive line, their cruisers moving closer to her flagship. She gave an order Daniel didn't expect: redirect shield power away from the rear and focus everything forward. The officers obeyed instantly, though several glanced at each other with unease. Daniel realized what she was doing. She was inviting the enemy closer. Her plan unfolded quickly. As the Dominion fleet pressed forward, their ships formed a narrow spear aimed at her command bridge. At the last moment, she commanded a full broadside from her secondary batteries, tearing through the enemy flanks and leaving their spearhead exposed. It was a brutal maneuver, precise and merciless. Daniel couldn't help but admire it, but the enemy didn't break. Their lead ship powered forward, ignoring the destruction around them, determined to ram the flagship. The bridge trembled violently as another impact rocked the hull. Sparks rained from overhead panels, and alien officers rushed to keep systems stable. She didn't flinch once. She turned to Daniel and asked him a question that felt out of place: how many people he had saved before coming here. He answered honestly, hundreds, maybe more. She studied his face as though trying to measure something deeper than his words. Then she told him that she had saved millions, but no one ever thanked her. They only feared her because of how she fought. The enemy lead ship drew closer. Daniel could see it on the main display, its hull glowing with heat from incoming fire. She ordered the chains on her wrists removed. The officers froze for a heartbeat, then obeyed. The metal restraints clattered to the floor, and Daniel felt a shift in the air, as if the ship itself was aware she was now unbound. She stepped forward, her hands outstretched, and strange energy flared around her fingers. The holographic battlefield flickered as real space outside the flagship twisted. Daniel saw arcs of violet light leap from her body into the command systems, fusing her presence with the ship's weapons. The next volley that struck the enemy ship was unlike anything he had seen, pure energy, tearing through hull and shields as if they were paper. The Kyrr flagship split in two, its burning remains drifting into the void. For a moment, the battle froze. Then the remaining Dominion ships turned and fled. Victory was hers, but she didn't celebrate. She turned back to Daniel, her expression calm, and told him he was not leaving yet. Outside, the stars shimmered in silence, but inside the bridge, the air still carried the weight of something unfinished. Asterisk. The bridge returned to its quiet hum, but Daniel could still feel the weight of the battle pressing against the walls. Alien officers moved with precision, clearing debris and restoring systems, yet their eyes kept darting toward her. There was respect in their gaze, but also something else, fear, the kind that never left even in victory. She gave more orders, her voice low but unshakable, sending fleets to secure the wreckage and recover what they could. Daniel stood where she had left him, unsure whether he was a guest or a prisoner. Her gaze met his once, but she didn't call him forward. Instead, she turned toward the lift and motioned for him to follow. The corridors were long and cold, lined with strange markings that seemed older than the ship itself. Daniel walked behind her, his boots echoing faintly in the silence. He wondered if she had always commanded fear, or if something in her past had forced her to become the monster everyone claimed she was. They stopped before a large sealed door. She touched her palm to a scanner, and the metal parted to reveal a chamber unlike any other he had seen. It was circular, the walls glowing faintly with soft violet light. In the center stood a table carved from dark stone, etched with patterns that pulsed in rhythm with her own eyes. She told him to sit. When he did, she remained standing, her tall frame casting a shadow over him. She asked again why he had come, but this time her voice was quieter, almost careful. He told her the truth. He wanted to see if the stories were wrong. He wanted to know if the most feared being in the galaxy was truly the monster they said she was. Her expression didn't change, but she tilted her head slightly, studying him. She told him that the stories were not wrong, they were incomplete. Then she began to speak, not like a commander addressing a soldier, but like someone remembering a past they wished they could forget. Years ago, she had been given command over a fleet meant to defend her people. But when the galaxy turned on them, she was ordered to strike first, to destroy entire colonies before they could join the enemy. Every life she took had been calculated, necessary for her people's survival. Yet the other worlds never saw the reasons, only the destruction. They branded her as the destroyer, the weapon, the monster who thrived on fear. Daniel listened without interrupting. Her voice carried no pride, only the weight of choices no one should have to make. He realized that she wasn't fighting for conquest. She was fighting to keep her people alive in a galaxy that wanted them erased. But there was something she wasn't saying. Daniel sensed it in the way she avoided his eyes when she spoke of the war's beginning. He asked her directly why the sudden attack now, if she had been holding back for so long. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. The Kyrr Dominion had taken something from her. Not a weapon, not a fleet, something more personal. Daniel didn't know what it was, but the way her voice tightened told him it mattered more than any victory. A faint alarm sounded through the ship, breaking the heavy air. She didn't move, didn't even glance at the door. Instead, she told him he was going to see something no outsider had ever been allowed to witness. She gestured for him to follow, and this time, the guards at the door stepped aside without question. The lift carried them deep into the flagship, far below the command decks, into an area Daniel guessed few had ever entered. When the doors opened, the air was warmer, carrying a faint metallic scent. The hallway ahead was lit by narrow beams of light, each step echoing louder than the last. They stopped before another sealed door. She placed her hand against it, and the locks disengaged with a low hiss. Inside, the room was smaller than he expected, almost plain, except for the large crystal structure at its center. The crystal pulsed with a soft blue glow, its light reflecting. In her eyes, Daniel took a step forward, but the guards at the entrance shifted, their hands resting on their weapons. She raised a hand to stop them, then told Daniel this crystal was the heart of her ship, and the reason she could never simply walk away from the war. He didn't understand at first, until she spoke the next words. Inside that crystal, in a suspended state, was the one thing she could not lose. Daniel couldn't see what was within, but he could hear the change in her voice when she said it. This was not about power or survival anymore. It was about someone she would destroy entire worlds to protect. The realization settled over him, and for the first time, he began to understand why the galaxy feared her, but also why she fought the way she did. Daniel stood in silence, his eyes fixed on the glowing crystal. The soft blue light shimmered across the polished floor, casting long shifting shadows. He could feel the faint hum of energy vibrating through the air, as though the entire ship's heartbeat pulsed from within that single object. She moved closer to it, her hand resting gently against the smooth surface. The light inside swirled and shifted at her touch, forming vague shapes too distorted to see clearly, yet carrying an undeniable sense of life. Her voice softened when she spoke, almost as if she were speaking to the crystal itself rather than to him. She told him that inside was her sister, the last of her family, the only person left who remembered her before the galaxy knew her as a weapon. Her sister had been caught in the first strike of the Kyrr Dominion's betrayal, gravely wounded and placed into stasis to preserve her life. The crystal chamber was the only thing keeping her alive, powered by the flagship itself. Daniel felt a weight settle in his chest. He understood now every battle she fought, every fleet she crushed, every risk she took was to keep the ship safe. If it fell, her sister would be gone forever. She looked at him, her gaze sharp yet tired, as if daring him to judge her. But he didn't. He simply asked why she was telling him something no other outsider had ever known. She replied that she needed someone who wasn't afraid of her to see the truth, because fear could never understand what she was willing to do. The hum of the crystal filled the silence between them. Then the ship's intercom came alive with an urgent transmission. Dominion reinforcements had entered the system. More ships than before, closing in fast. The guards at the door straightened immediately, waiting for her command, but she didn't answer them right away. Instead, she kept her eyes on Daniel. She told him there was a choice to make. She could withdraw now, retreat into deep space where the Dominion couldn't follow, keeping her sister safe but abandoning the worlds already under attack. Or she could fight, risking everything including the crystal chamber, just to keep the enemy from gaining ground. Daniel didn't hesitate. He told her to fight. She narrowed her eyes at him, studying the conviction in his voice. When he didn't waver, she gave a single nod. Her decision was made. They left the chamber and returned to the lift. As they ascended, Daniel could feel the change in the ship, power shifting, systems coming alive, weapons primed for battle. The corridors that had been quiet minutes ago now pulsed with urgency. Soldiers moved quickly, preparing for what could be the largest fight of their lives. On the bridge, the massive holographic display lit up with enemy signatures. The Dominion fleet had already formed a siege perimeter, ready to crush anything that tried to break through. Her officers looked to her for orders, their postures tense but disciplined. She didn't speak at first. She glanced at Daniel, then stepped to the center of the command platform. When she finally gave the command, it was not in the language of her people, but in galactic standards so that Daniel, and perhaps the universe listening beyond, would understand her words. She told them they would not run, they would not hide, and they would not give the Dominion the victory they expected. The fleet moved. Her flagship surged forward, cutting through the formation with precise, devastating strikes. Daniel watched as her tactics shifted like flowing water, never meeting the enemy's strength head-on for long, always moving, always forcing them into the angles she chose. He had seen skilled captains before, but nothing like this. Yet for all her brilliance, the Dominion's numbers began to take their toll. Multiple ships closed in on their flanks, hammering at their shields. Alarms blared as structural integrity dipped in several sections. Still, she didn't flinch. She gave Daniel an order, one he hadn't expected. She told him to take the auxiliary helm and plot an interception course directly toward the Dominion's command carrier. He knew it was dangerous, maybe suicidal. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw no doubt. The flagship's engines roared, tearing through enemy lines as explosions lit the void. The carrier loomed ahead, its massive hull bristling with weapons. Daniel felt his pulse quicken, but his hands were steady on the controls. She stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, not as a gesture of comfort, but as a sign of trust. The final approach began, the distance closing fast. The bridge trembled under enemy fire, the carrier's silhouette filling the display. Daniel realized in that moment that if they failed, it wouldn't just mean defeat, it would mean the end of her sister, her fleet, and everything she had fought to protect. The enemy carrier filled the viewport, its armored hull layered with shield plating that shimmered under the constant barrage. Daniel's fingers moved over the controls, adjusting their approach as enemy fire rained against the flagships. Shields. The ship groaned under the strain, but her voice cut through the chaos, steady and unshaken, calling out maneuvers to her officers in rapid succession. Their weapons struck the carrier's flanks, tearing through secondary batteries. But the main guns remained active. The Dominion ship fought like a cornered beast, spitting fire in all directions. Daniel's console flashed warning shields at 60%, then 50%. He could feel the heat building inside the bridge, the air tense and heavy as if the ship itself was holding its breath. She stepped closer to the center platform, her eyes locked on the carrier. In that moment, Daniel realized she wasn't looking at it as just a target. She was looking at it as a personal enemy. Her voice dropped lower, as if she were speaking to herself, naming the commander who had ordered her sister's capture. The carrier unleashed a concentrated volley toward their bow. The deck shook violently, throwing sparks from the overhead panels. Daniel gripped the controls, keeping their trajectory steady. She ordered all forward weapons to maximum output, their cannons roaring with blinding energy bursts that lit the fight, the blackness of space like lightning. But the carrier's defenses were stronger than expected. Their shots tore through sections of armor, yet the ship refused to break. She glanced at Daniel, her gaze sharp, and told him they couldn't win this fight at range. The only way to end it was to strike from inside. Her plan was as dangerous as it sounded, launching a strike team directly into the carrier's hangar while the flagship's guns kept the rest of the Dominion fleet busy. Daniel didn't hesitate. He told her he was going with her. She didn't argue, but the faintest flicker in her eyes suggested she hadn't expected his answer. Minutes later, they stood in the launch bay, surrounded by her elite soldiers. The assault craft's engines roared to life, its hull rattling. As they shot out into the battle, enemy fire streaked past them in burning lines of red, each one a near miss that could have ended the mission. Daniel kept his focus forward, gripping the side rail as they closed in on the hangar's shield barrier. The moment they breached it, The inside erupted in chaos. Dominion troops poured in from every corridor, their weapons flashing in the dim light. Her soldiers met them with precision, cutting through the first lines in seconds. She moved like a force of nature, each strike deliberate and final. Her chains now gone, her full strength unleashed. Daniel followed close, his blaster firing in controlled bursts, covering her back as they advanced deeper into the carrier. They reached the central control chamber, a towering room filled with command consoles and a wide viewport overlooking the battle outside. At its center stood the Dominion commander, his armor a deep crimson, his presence radiating the same confidence she carried. The moment he saw her, he raised his weapon, but she didn't fire. She stepped forward slowly, her voice cold as she spoke his name. Daniel didn't understand the language, but he felt the tension in the air. This wasn't just war, it was vengeance. The commander taunted her, his tone dripping with arrogance. He thought she wouldn't risk killing him because of what he knew about her sister. Daniel realized too late that this was a trap. Hidden turrets descended from the ceiling, locking onto their position. The room lit up with warning lights as doors sealed shut. The commander smirked, confident that she was caught, but she didn't panic. She stepped in front of Daniel, raising her hands as the same violet energy from the previous battle flared to life. The turrets fired, but the bolts dissolved in midair, bent away by a shield of pure force. With a single motion, she redirected that energy toward the turrets, shattering them in bursts of molten metal. The commander charged, his blade glowing with searing heat. She met him head-on, their clash shaking the room. Daniel moved to join the fight, but one of her soldiers blocked him, shaking his head. This was her battle. Sparks flew with every strike, the hum of energy blades cutting through the roar of the fight outside. Finally, with a decisive blow, she disarmed him, sending his weapon skidding across the floor. She stood over him, breathing steadily, her weapon poised. The commander spat defiance, but she struck not to kill, but to disable, knocking him unconscious in a single crushing motion. Daniel stepped forward as she turned to him. She told him the carrier's control codes were now theirs, but they had to act fast before the rest of the Dominion fleet realized what happened. Together, they moved to the main console, inputting the sequence that would disable the carrier's engines and weapons. Outside, the tide of battle shifted instantly. The Dominion ships began to scatter, retreating without their command vessel. Victory was within reach, but Daniel knew this wasn't over, not until the threat to her sister was gone for good. The carrier's systems shut down in a wave of flickering lights, the great warship drifting powerless among the debris. The flagship's sensors confirmed it. The Dominion fleet was breaking apart, their formation crumbling without leadership. Her soldiers moved with swift precision, retrieving the unconscious commander and securing the control codes. Daniel stood beside her at the console, watching the enemy retreat. The battle outside was nearly over, yet he could see no relief on her face. Her eyes were fixed on the stars beyond the viewport, her mind already on the next step. She spoke quietly, telling him that this victory would not last. The Dominion would regroup. Others would come. The galaxy would not stop fearing her, no matter what she did. Daniel met her gaze and told her that fear didn't erase the truth, that she had just saved countless lives. They returned to the assault craft, the flagship's hangar opening to receive them. The moment they stepped aboard, the air felt different, not just from the battle's end, but from the subtle shift in how the crew looked at Daniel. He was no longer just an outsider. He had stood beside her in the fight. That meant something here. She led him back down through the ship, past the guarded halls, until they stood once more before the crystal chamber. The blue light glowed steady, undisturbed by the violence outside. She placed her hand against it, and for the first time, Daniel saw a clearer shape within a young woman, peaceful and still. Her features delicate and unmarked by war, She told him the codes taken from the commander contained something she had been seeking for years, a sequence to stabilize her sister's failing life support field. Daniel watched as she entered the command, the crystal shifting as the blue glow deepened. The hum grew stronger, warmer, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. Her soldiers remained silent, their eyes averted, as though this moment belonged only to her. Daniel didn't speak either. He simply stood close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. When the sequence completed, the crystal's light steadied, no longer flickering with instability. Her sister's image inside seemed calmer, her chest rising in slow, even breaths. For the first time since he had met her, Daniel saw her shoulders ease. She turned to him, and the faintest smile touched her lips, not one of triumph, but of quiet gratitude. She said she owed him more than she could repay. He shook his head, telling her he had only done what anyone should do when they see someone worth standing beside. She studied him for a long moment, as though weighing his words against the countless betrayals she had endured. Then she told him that from this day forward, he would not be a guest on her flagship, he would be part of it. Not as a soldier under her command, but as an equal whose voice she would hear when others only shouted. When they returned to the bridge, the view was clear, the Dominion ships were gone, their trail fading into the endless dark. The galaxy would not know the full truth of what happened here. They would still speak her name with fear. But now, there was one person who saw beyond the legend, who knew the woman beneath the armored dot as Daniel stood beside her at the command platform. The stars stretched before them like an open road. She turned her gaze toward the void ahead, her voice low but steady as she ordered the fleet forward. For the first time in years, her path was not driven by fear or vengeance alone. It was driven by the knowledge that someone had chosen to stand with her, not because they had to, but because they believed in her. The universe still trembled at her name. But now, when she walked into the unknown, she would not walk alone.